So we're live. It's good to have all of y'all with us, as we say pretty much every week. If you're joining us on Facebook, thank you for joining us. If you're coming back and watching it after the fact, we're glad you're here as well. Here come two latecomers, but we're glad they're here. We won't mention their names on camera so that they don't. Oh, it's Kelly. All right. So they don't feel embarrassed, but they can embarrass themselves. Ed and Kelly. So anyway, it's just been a good week. I'm glad y'all are here. I know we've got a busy afternoon. Many of us do, and we're looking forward to the classes tonight and getting those started up again. We've actually been a semester or so without Sunday night classes. We didn't have really any in the spring, and we've brought them back more as true discipleship classes, really trying to help our folks grow. So it's good. I hope you all take part in that. And if you're watching on Facebook and you live in the Gardendale area, they're not going to be live on Facebook, so you'll have to be here. So come out at 6 o'clock, find a class. I'm going to ask you all some questions today. We're going to start off, we're going to have a little bit of a history lesson, and we're going to go back right at 400 years. In fact, we're going to go back 398 and some change, because November will be 399. November of next year will be 400. So let me ask you, what happened in 1620 in November in our country? You're not quite that old, so you don't. Okay, that's Thanksgiving's a good guess, but it's before the first Thanksgiving. That should clue you in just a little bit.
The Pilgrims.
They landed. The Mayflower landed at Plymouth Rock. That's right. So the Massachusetts Bay Colony was founded. They started out from Holland and England, and they ended up here. The Mayflower arrived in November of 1620. So next year, in 2020, that's 400 years since the Mayflower landed. It had 102 passengers. We actually have the names of the passengers. The Mayflower Compact, and they kept good records for who was there, and we actually can find out who was actually there. Of the 102 passengers, 46 of those are the ones we refer to as the Puritans or the Separatists. The other passengers were not Separatists. There were also 30 to 36, don't really know exactly how many crew members, and two dogs. Two dogs made the trip. It is now estimated, Drew, this is just an estimation, but you know how people like to do this. They can make up stats on the spot. So it is now estimated that between 30 and 35 million descendants of the Mayflower passengers are around. 30 to 35 million of them. So in 400 years, that 102 people who landed at Plymouth Rock have now grown to somewhere between probably 30 to 35 million. You say, how did you come up with that? I just looked it up. I Googled it. I did not use Wikipedia. Okay, so I don't know how true the source was, but it was not Wikipedia. I can tell you that because I won't use them. But there's that many estimates. Tell me about them. They were Puritans. What do you know about Puritans? Someone in the other class said nothing, and I said, that's a legitimate answer, okay? So how many of you would say, I know really nothing about the Puritans? Okay, good. I'm glad y'all are honest about that. That's fine. I want to tell you a few things, but I just want you to know that their faith still does exist. There are shoots that have come off of the Puritans that you are going to be very familiar with. In fact, our Baptist roots here in America can be traced back to a Puritan. His name was Roger Williams. We'll talk about him in a minute. But Puritanism traces its back to the beginnings of the English Reformation. Puritans was a term of contempt, by the way. People who didn't like them used the word Puritan as a term of contempt. It was given to them simply by their enemies. In the 1530s, Henry VIII, and now how many of you are singing the song in your head? Good, because I've been singing it for 2 days. Henry VIII, I am. He railed against papal authority in the Catholic Church, the Church of Rome, and instead transformed the Church of Rome into the State Church of England. Okay, you with me so far? Henry VIII didn't like the papal authority of the Church of Rome. He took the Church of Rome and converted it and transformed it into the National Church of England. The Puritans felt the Church of England still retained too much Catholic aspect of rituals and liturgy, so they began to separate from the Church of England themselves, hence the term separatists. They were, another way has been talked about in the years past, we're going all the way back to even before them, the term Protestant has in it the idea, the very root of the word is protest, okay? It's good to know, it's important to know that the Baptists and the Anabaptists, even though we're considered a Protestant denomination because we're not Catholic, pretty much it's Catholic and then Protestant. Well, we didn't protest anything. However, as they gained strength, Puritans were portrayed by their enemies as hair splitters. You ever heard that term? You're a hair splitter? Stop splitting hairs? What do people mean when they say stop splitting hairs? You're nitpicking. There's another colloquialism to define this colloquialism, okay? So there were hair splitters when we're nitpicking. Basically, here's what they were being called hair splitters for. They were slavishly following their Bibles as guides for daily life. That was the complaint. Sound familiar? The Puritans were called hair splitters because they slavishly followed their Bibles as guides to daily life, or they were being called hypocrites because they cheated the very neighbors that they judged to not be Christian enough. Okay? So that's the Puritan life. Long story short, the First Baptist Church in America was started in 1638 in Providence, Rhode Island by a guy named Roger Williams, a man of Puritan heritage who had been banished from the Massachusetts Bay Colony because of his beliefs concerning church purity and its submission to the lordship of Christ as, importantly, autonomous, individualistic local churches. Okay, what does that mean? It means Roger Williams said that churches should not have an overarching governing authority outside of themselves. That you should be a baptized believer to be a member of the church, and that church should be autonomous compared to every other church. Sounds like it's a Baptist faith we still follow today. We are all autonomous as Baptist churches. Now, we cooperate together. We are part of a cooperation. In fact, in the Southern Baptist world, it's called the Cooperative Program, where you have Gardendale First Baptist is a member of the North Jefferson Association of Baptists, which is also a member of the Alabama Baptist, which is a member of the Southern Baptist nationally. Okay, so we work together, but there is no governing body outside of Gardendale First Baptist Church that can dictate to us what we say, what we believe, or how we do things. Someone asked me in the other class, well, what denominations have that now? Presbyterians do, Methodists do, Church of Christ does. So other denominations have regional directors and offices that actually, in fact, it's not every Methodist church follows it, but they're basically all Methodist churches are told to do the same sermon every Sunday. Here's the sermon, here's the outline, do that. Okay? Not all Methodist churches follow it, but there is a lot of control there. So Baptist churches don't have it. That was the way it worked. So 400 years ago, a group of people left their homeland, came to America, 102 landed. They now grow to be somewhere between 30 to 35 million according to the estimates. And it's a group of people who we know nothing about. Consider that. These are our religious forefathers here in the United States. Now, we know some things about our own faith, our own denomination, and they came out of that. But when asked the question, who knows some things about the Puritans, y'all were pretty much like, well, nobody. Right? Now, interestingly, you have grown up, this is a country where the Christian faith has been practiced by the majority of people since that time. And we still don't know about our people who came before us. See the point I'm making there? We're here, we're following the Christian faith just like they did, but we've lost track of what there are still Puritans, by the way. Puritans, Quakers, Shakers, I'm trying to think of something clever there, It's just not coming. So, but there are still some of those folks around who follow those faiths, but as in general, it's almost a lost denomination, lost faith. Brings us to Exodus chapter 14. What? Why are we talking about the Quakers and the Puritans and going into Exodus? Well, it just so happens Exodus chapter 14 is the very popular and famous known story of the Bible of the crossing of the Red Sea. And as we get involved into this story, I really want to ask you all, who's involved in it? Tell me the players. Who's involved in the crossing of the Red Sea? Moses, the Israelites. Huh?
I said the
Israelites. I didn't hear you. Aaron, okay. Egyptians are there. They're a pretty important player in the game, right? God, there you go. God's in there, all right? We don't want to leave him out, all right? So what's his name? Yahweh, all right, good. What does he refer to himself as to Moses? I am, good. So y'all are tracking with me pretty good. 400 years before this date, the Israelites' forefathers, a guy named Israel, and his 12 sons and their families, a totaling 70 in all, left their homeland because of tragedy, because of situation and circumstances. For them, it was a famine. For our ancestors, the Puritans, it was persecution. Okay? So they left their homeland and went to Egypt to be taken care of by the one son who was sold into slavery and ended up rising all the way to second in command of Egypt, and that was Joseph, right? So they bring Joseph brings them back. They moved from Canaan all the way into Egypt. Their moving trucks was owned by Pharaoh. Okay, they were bedazzled really good. They had glitter on the sides or whatever, but it wasn't 2 men in a truck. It was 2 horses and a chariot. I don't know, but they moved with using Pharaoh. Pharaoh showed favor to them because they were the family of Joseph, and he moved them in.
I have a question.
Okay.
How many pharaohs are there?
Oh, mercy.
I mean, is that the name of the king of
Pharaoh is his title. It's not his name. Ramses would be like Pharaoh Ramses was a title of. There's a couple of 2 or 3 Ramses,
Okay.
but just like King Henry, instead of king, it's Pharaoh. Okay, so Henry VIII again. There you go. So like the Mayflower ancestors, Jacob and his family left their home country, moved to Egypt, with 70 of them coming in. Exodus 12:37 tells us 600,000 men, 600,000 countable men walked out of Egypt when they left. Okay, now you know how statistics and the numbers are done in the Old Testament. Only you had to be an adult male to be counted. So that doesn't include women and children. But we also know by custom that 600,000 men would probably have really close to 600,000 wives. Because if you were, the days of that time said, if you're that age, you're married. Okay? So just a good estimate, we can say, and some of them had more than one wife. Well, we're getting to them. But they would have had more than one wife, possibly. So we're just going to go with a good rough estimate of 600,000 women to go along with them. We're already at 1.2 million people just by doing the adults. Okay? Then you start adding kids. We in America, we kind of stop around 2. Right? That's the average average size. But then you have people like the Moody's who have 6 and more. Who were the Duggars? Had what, 21, something like that? They had a lot of kids. Okay, that's unusual for us, but it wouldn't have been for them. But we're going to just go with us. Okay, if it's just 2 kids per family, which is a really low ball estimate, you're adding another 1.2 million. So we're at 2.4 to 2.5 million in a low ball estimate for the amount of people who walked out. Some say it's closer to 5. Okay, we don't think of that. We think of these ragtag band of people leaving out of Egypt, and we're picturing, it's just a small group heading out. No, it's huge. Think about that when you talk. Go ahead. The whole state of Alabama. There you go. And you think, yeah, because that's about it's close. It's close. So you have, it's like it's less people, but think about the island of Manhattan. I mean, there's probably more in the island of Manhattan, but still, just on that one island. So it's crazy amount of people. I can't remember. I wish I would have looked this up, but I had a professor tell me one time, if we're talking about 2.5 to 3 million people in the way that God fed them twice a day with manna, the length of the train of boxcars that it would take to provide 2 meals to 2.5 to 3 million people was miles long, you know. And then you think about the rock, you know, everybody needed water from the rock, and the rock. So we're not talking about a mistaken little bit of moisture seeping out of the edge of a rock. 2.5 to 3 million people got water from that rock. Okay, put it in perspective for you. That's a lot of folks. So they have walked out. It tells us in Exodus chapter 1, verse 8, there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. That's understandable. Okay? We're talking 10 to 12 generations since Joseph, when the people are getting ready to leave. When God tells Moses, I want you to go get the people and tell them we're taking them out of Egypt. When you go do that, it's 10 or 12 generations that they've been there without Joseph. Joseph dies. Eventually, the pharaohs, they don't know who he was anymore. You may not believe this, but I was well known on my Bible college campus. I mean, everybody knew. Now we had 100. Well, that's the question. But I was a big wig on my campus. Everybody knew me. All 150 students. You know, it was a big school. But now it's been 20 years. I go back. We were actually in Harlan for Christmas a couple years ago, and I had some schoolwork I needed to do. And to put me in the right frame of mind and to be quiet and everything, I drove the 40 minutes from Harlan over to my Bible college and went to the library. And would you believe that people came in and walked past me and had no idea who I was? Is that, I mean, can you believe that?
Picture or anything?
I mean, there's not a picture on the wall, you know. I don't know what you said. No historical marker. You know, Keenan was once here. There was none of that going on. So, and it's only been 20 years. All right, right. But imagine 400 years. There arose a king in Pharaoh who did not have any clue who Joseph was. Some historical record showed about a guy who saved the nation and the surrounding area during a 7-year famine, but they didn't know him, right? So now Pharaoh, instead of showing favor to the Israelites, he's concerned about them because they're big enough that if they wanted to cause him some grief, if they wanted to rise up against the nation of Egypt, if they had an army come in against them and this group of people living out there in an area called Goshen, if they were to decide to join in with that other army, Egypt could be in trouble. So to prevent that, he pits taskmasters above them. This is when they actually become enslaved and in bondage because they're worried about them. So now Moses shows up on the scene and Yahweh tells Moses, I want you to go get them. But here's the problem, Moses. They don't know who I am. Think about that. 400 years, no prophets coming to them. Everything's passed down orally. All it takes is for one person to stop that from happening, right? I pass it down to my kids, but my kids didn't pass it down to theirs. They don't know who Yahweh is. They've heard the stories. They've heard of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They know who their forefathers are. We live in a nation where Christianity is practiced, and we don't know about the Puritans. They live in a nation where polygamy is being practiced, where many, many gods are being worshipped, and they've lost Yahweh. How do we know that? How do we know that how do you know that I'm not just making this up? Let me tell you. Yahweh asked Moses basically to make the introductions. In Exodus chapter 3, verse 13, it says this, Then Moses said to God, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? they don't even know his name. If they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, say this to the people of Israel. I am has sent me to you. I am is a conjunctional form of the word Yahweh. It's in there. When you look in the Hebrew, it's actually right in there. So God also said to Moses, say to this people of Israel, the Lord. Now, I've got this copied and pasted onto my paper here. I copied it off of the Bible Gateway app so I could look at it directly here, not have to flip pages. But when it does that, it doesn't bring in all the capital letters for the word Lord. Would you confirm for me that in Exodus chapter 3, verse 15, that the Lord, the God of your fathers, is all caps? What does the Lord mean when it's all caps? It's Yahweh. So listen to how he's introduced it himself. God's also... I'm sorry?
Mine doesn't have it on one cap.
But you're on, what are you reading?
ESV.
ESV?
Yeah, I've got ESV pulled up.
My King James has it all caps.
Let me see if it's
Well, now you've got me confused.
Did it flip?
Yeah, my ESV has it as Lord, all caps.
Oh, never mind. It somehow or another I changed to ASV.
Oh, well, okay. But it is all caps. It's his name. It's Yahweh. That's the name that when they're given the 10 Commandments, when he says, you do not take the Lord thy God's name in vain, that's the name. That's the name they took so serious. They took that command so serious, they wouldn't even pronounce it. They were so scared of taking his name in vain, they would use the word Adonai instead. So they would even write in their margins of their scrolls, Adonai in the corner, instead of using the word Yahweh to make sure they didn't take it in vain. He's introducing himself personally to these people. This is his personal name. And when he makes a covenant, he makes the covenant by his name. So when he says, the Lord your God, Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I have observed you and what has been done to you in Egypt, and I promise that I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, and a land flowing with milk and honey. He said, my name is Yahweh. That's the covenant-making name of God. So when he invokes the name of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and he says, you don't know me, but they did. Remember those covenants you've heard over the years? That oral tradition you've heard that's been passed down from generation to generation? That Yahweh, there was a God who made a covenant with Abraham and with Isaac and with Jacob, and that covenant has come to pass. He has kept that promise. We look at us now. We are now 3 million people. We are now greater than the seas of the sands on the seas of the shore. We are greater than the stars in the sky. You can't number us. Look at this covenant that has been kept by the people, or by this God that we've heard of. By the way, his name is Yahweh, and he's coming for you. He's heard you. And did you catch what he said? This covenant-making God, this God who calls himself Yahweh, who made that same covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, this covenant-making God promises you he's heard your affliction, and he's going to bring you out. That's what Moses is sent to do. Moses makes the introduction, and you know the rest of the story. They go in, Moses tells Pharaoh, let my people go. I don't know what kind of voice Moses had, but I hear Charlton Heston because of the movie, right? I hear, what's his name?
James Earl.
No, actually, yes, but no, the guy.
Where do you want to go?
The guy on the we need to change. Come on back. We need the Allstate commercial guy. Are you in good hands? I mean, that's the voice of Moses. Now, I can't do it justice, but there's the comedian and preacher Dennis Swanberg, who said the voice of Moses was Jimmy Stewart. You know, Pharaoh, let him go. So I don't have that one, but I hear a deep Moses, and my name's Moses. So, and James Earl Jones would be God, take off your shoes, Moses. So we know the story. We know the story. He comes and he tells Pharaoh, let my people go. And in the process, Pharaoh says, no, and we're not going to do it. So finally he sends 10 plagues. And eventually Pharaoh says, I've had enough of you. Get on out of here. And they take off and they leave. And before long, Pharaoh changes his mind because he's wishy-washy like that. And he says, all right, I'm going to need 600 chariots to go get them.
You say Pharaoh changes his mind, but the Lord said he hardens his heart.
The Lord did harden his heart, but in the process of the Lord hardening his heart, it's a change of mind to Pharaoh. Okay? So that's a whole deeper theological discussion we need to have on what does it mean when God says hardened their hearts. Because that almost sounds like God made it to where he couldn't say no, or he couldn't say yes. And then you're going, well, did God manipulate the situation that much? And if he couldn't say Pharaoh couldn't say yes, then was it fair punishment? So that gets into a whole nother, can't go there right now, don't have the time. So, we'll do it another time though. So Pharaoh says, go get them, and he sends 600, that's a major can. He sends 600 of his best chariots and soldiers after. Now, who is Egypt? In the world, in world geography, in this time of the life of Israel, who is Egypt?
The powerhouse.
The powerhouse. They are the power of the world. They are the strongest army. So the Israelites have found themselves now stuck between the devil and the deep blue sea. They've got the world's strongest army bearing down on them. They're carpenters, they're masons, they're farmers, they're housekeepers. They are not soldiers. Right? They plundered the Egyptians. God said, use your Jedi mind trick on them and go tell them to give you their riches, and they did. I love the you need to give me this golden candlestick. Here, I'm going to give you this golden candlestick. So they left with all these riches to finance their trip, but they don't have weapons, right? They're stuck. So we get to a point where they are now understanding what's happening. So in Exodus chapter 14, starting in verse 10, it says, when Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they feared greatly. They feared greatly. Okay, I would say they were trembling. I would say they were needing to pins. I'm saying things are going on in their bodies that they can't control because they're scared out of their wits, right? And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord. Now, it's interesting. It doesn't really tell us what they cried out to Yahweh. But they cried out to Yahweh and then immediately looked at Moses and said, is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us in bringing us out of Egypt? Is not this what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians, for it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. It would be better for us to be enslaved to the Egyptians than for us to live in the freedom that God has for us. But they're scared. Now, we have the benefit of being beyond the story and looking back at it. So we know how the story ends. We know that Moses spreads out his hand over the sea and its parts, and they end up walking across on dry ground. How wide would that have had to have been for 3 million people to walk across it?
About a huge statewide.
It would have to be, interstate wide. I mean, they've got an interstate.
Yeah.
I-65, right down the middle of the Red Sea, right?
Both sides.
Yeah. Both sides. Maybe it's I-5 or the I-10 or the I-5 in Los Angeles where it's 12 lanes on each side or whatever. They've got a wide swath that they're walking through. Then we know the story, you'll watch it on the History Channel and you'll watch it on the Smithsonian. They'll try to say that they didn't really cross there, that where they crossed, it wasn't that wide. But here, keep this in mind. We also know that God tells them in verse 13, he says, the Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. And we know that as the story goes, the Israelites get out of the Red Sea, and then the chariots of Pharaoh's army are still in there. How many chariots did I tell you there were? 600. So there had to be enough space, enough distance that all 600 of those chariots were in there at the same time.
Yeah.
But not actually on them.
but not onto them yet, right? And then the water closes in over them and drowns them all, right? So that's a major ordeal. We know the rest of the story. They don't. We give them a hard time. Sometimes we look at them and say, where's your faith? They're just being reintroduced to Yahweh. They don't know him. They only know stories. They've not actually witnessed his covenants coming true. All they know is yesterday were making bricks of straw, and today they're stuck between the biggest army in the world and the Red Sea with nowhere to go. They were scared. In fact, it tells us in verse 13, Moses said to the people, "Fear not." Now, Moses' response might sound trifle, but notice he didn't say, you should not be afraid. Circumstances for them were legit. They knew what was coming on. Moses wasn't trying to make light of the situation, but he told them to fear not. When do you need to be hearing fear not? What makes you afraid? What are the things that make us scared today? Why do we fear? Violence and crime, illness, financial difficulties, the unknown. Where'd that come from? That's right, the unknown. The unknown really gets us. I have written down here, sometimes it's unknown. Sometimes it's because we can't see the future. We don't know how this will work out. All that kind of falls under the idea of it being unknown. We're worried about our families. We fear because we know we don't have the answers or the abilities to fix whatever's wrong. I actually have written down, sometimes our fear is imagined in our own minds. We're our own worst enemy. And we will do the what ifs, and we build it up, and we're all drama queens from time to time who build upon and build upon and build upon, and next thing you know, we're stressed and worried and fearful to the point that we're paralyzed. We don't know what to do. Truth is, Moses didn't tell them to just get over it. He didn't make light of their fear. The circumstances were real. They don't know what's coming next. At this point, Moses doesn't even really know what's coming next. But he tells them to fear not, and he doesn't just tell them not to fear, he tells them how to handle it. Notice what he said. He said, "Fear not." He said, "Stand firm and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord," that's Yahweh, by the way, his name is Yahweh, "will fight for you, and you have only to be silent." He said, "Fear not," but then he said, "Stand firm." The idea of standing firm is to resist, to put oneself, or to station oneself so that you can resist. Moses is basically telling them, station yourself in a place that you are ready to resist the fear you feel. Name it. Stand up and name it. Don't let yourself be paralyzed by it. Call it for what it is. We don't do very good at policing our own thoughts. We don't do very good at saying, okay, here is why I'm scared, and naming it out loud. Of course, people think you're crazy if you're talking to yourself. So I don't know if you want to really walk down the aisle at the workplace, talking out loud to yourself. But we don't do that very well. We don't call it for what it is. We don't call it the temptation we're facing. We don't just straight up and say, "Kenan, don't do that. It's sinful. That's against God." We don't resist it. We tend to run from it rather than stand up ready to resist, ready to fight. Moses said, "Stand firm. Don't give in and don't be paralyzed by the fear." It's an active idea. Present yourself, but you're not presenting yourself to the fear. You are not saying, "Go ahead and freak me out." You are gathering yourself, acknowledging the fear, and then you are ready to not be afraid. Then you are ready to not be afraid. But how? Moses says, just watch. He said, stand firm and see the salvation of Yahweh, which he will work for you today. Now that you have gotten yourself in a position to resist the fear, so your activity now turns to watching. Moses doesn't say, watch and see how well you will handle it. He says, see the salvation of the Lord as he fights for you. Our issue is we're control freaks. Okay, you got good. Got a couple of people going without me even asking. Yeah, that's me. I'm a control freak. How am I going to fix this? God, I trust you, but even though I trust you, I'm going to go work on it over here on myself.
It's my backup plan.
Yeah.
In case you don't get through, God, that's my backup plan.
That's enough.
Yeah.
What's the song?
Absolutely.
What's the song we sing that He's never failed me? Now the problem with the song that we sing, and Tanner has even told me a couple of times that he hates it, and if you listen, he lets his voice drop off and doesn't even really say it because
Never failed me yet.
yet.
Yes, that word.
That word yet. What does it infer?
That
That he could. That's right. That word yet, that little simple word, infers the idea that God could fail us. I love that Tanner, if you pay attention, next time we sing that song, he always has something to say in the next musical bar where there's nothing being sang. He'll always say something to the effect of, God, you never fail us. Because we love the rest of the words of the song. But that word yet, we just cut it off? Just leave it out, you know? What would happen if we're singing it and the entire congregation just didn't sing that word? How powerful would that be?
I think we should do it for the rhyme.
But it's a, what?
Let's put it in there for the rhyme.
I know. It's there for melody, and I understand why it's there from a musical standpoint. But the theology it teaches is poor. He never failed. He's never failed. You fail all the time. You try to handle it yourself, and you handle it badly. Your choices may be what got you in this mess to begin with, right? So you're going to try to fix it on your own when you didn't fix it the first time and you made the trouble. Let God handle it. Just sit back and watch. Watch as Yahweh does the work. Watch as he shows you that not even the things that we are most afraid of are any match for him. For us, we can watch and see and reflect on what the Lord has already done. We can feel our faith grow because he has already done and he will do it again. We're in a better place ourselves than the Israelites were. We have God's word to look back. We know how the story ends. We see how God works it out, but we tend to forget about those things, and we forget to put God and what he's doing for us in the forefront. We tend to be spiritually immature people who are unable to make the perspective be what it needs to be. We focus on the fear rather than on the one who's going to get us out of the fear, out of the trouble. He said, listen, he said, the Lord will fight for you. Yahweh will fight for you in verse 14. He says, and you have only to be silent. So here's this. You stand firm. If it's persecution at work, if it's persecution in your family, if you're being brought down due to your beliefs in God, if you've got something going on that's bringing the fear of the unknown into your life, stand firm in what you know. What do you know? You know that Yahweh is a covenant keeper. You know that everything he has done, he will do again. And you know he's never failed you and he's not going to. You stand firm in that. But then what do? You don't go digging your own holes, and you don't go looking for your own weapons, and you don't go do whatever it is you think you ought to do. You sit and you let him do it, and you let him guide you. Problem is, most of us are not in a relationship that is close enough to him to really hear him when his Spirit tells us what we need to do. How in the world are we going to hear directions of the Holy Spirit if we don't know what his voice sounds like because we don't spend time with him each day? How are you going to be able to move until you have instruction? Stay and get instruction. Be silent. You have only one job. Be silent. That's tough. You would almost rather say, pick up your sword and run to the battle. Because being silent is very difficult. Another form of the word means to make no moves. Be still. You have a role. You stand firm, and then you be still, and you just watch what God's going to do. Then, when it's all said and done, you're able to praise Him because you had nothing to do with it. It was all about Him. It was always about Him. But we just had to come to a point where we would accept that. Stop trying to face your fears, your issues, your trials under your own power. The Israelites were in a heap of trouble. Moses did not say, everyone grab a weapon. He also did not say, follow your instincts and run. Right? He said, stand firm, watch, and be still. He said, position yourself to resist your fear. Oh, and by the way, watch this. Psalm 46 is a psalm that goes hand in hand with the meaning of these verses in Exodus. If you flip over to Psalm 46, it's only 11 verses. It's not going to take us long to work through it. But listen to the symbolism. Listen to the terminology used to describe God being on our side. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Another way it says instead of a very present help, a very well proven help is another way to say that. God has proved Himself. What is that old hymn? I've proved Him o'er and o'er. Yeah. Jesus, precious Jesus. Oh, for grace to trust Him more. Trust Him. Only trust Him. Tis so sweet. That's right. Tis so sweet to do what with Jesus? Trust in Jesus. The psalmist and the songwriter of that song agree. Oh, I've proved Him o'er and o'er. He has proven Himself. He is a help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved unto the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. This is physical description of turmoil in life. Okay? If the mountains are being thrown into the sea, that's a pretty big deal going on, right? This isn't just a simple, I got a hangnail today and things aren't going my way, right? Life's upside down and falling apart. Notice that it says Selah right there. Think about it. Think about it. Well, think about what the psalmist is saying. Then he says, there is a river whose streams make glad the city of gold. City of God. See, I should probably bring my reading glasses. But I'll make it up as I go along. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. He is describing just turmoil and trials and things going on around them. The nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He utters His voice, the earth melts. Yahweh of hosts, the Lord of hosts, is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. What's a fortress? Protection, okay. Somebody where would you find a fortress?
Castle.
Okay, castle, all right. Any movies you can think of that you can use as an illustration for a fortress?
Alamo.
The Alamo? I don't think I'm going to use that one.
It's supposed to be one.
It's supposed to be, okay. Okay. Okay, well, I was thinking of Lord of the Rings, where they go into that mountainous fortress where it was meant to protect everyone inside. Everyone inside of there was safe as long as they stayed inside. But some, it's like a storm shelter, that'll work. I wish I had one sometimes. Okay, but as long as you're inside, you're safe. What happens when you go outside the protection of the fortress? The dragon will eat you. Okay. Tornado will get you. Okay. The orcs will shoot you with their arrows. It's
The Hobbit, you're inside with the dragon.
That's right. Well, that's a whole nother. It's a fortress. It is God's protection. As long as you're inside His protection, you're good. But we tend to say, I can handle this myself. Let me fix this issue myself. And we step outside of His protection. Come, behold the works of the Lord. how he has brought desolations on the earth. Now he's saying, remember, think through what he's already done. What has he done for you? What has he done for our nation? What has he done for people? We can trust him. He makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. And then God speaks. And God says, be still. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. It is for my glory that I will protect you. It is for my glory that I will sustain you. All you have to do is be still. But we struggle with that. We don't like silence. We don't like the idea of not being involved in our own, pushing our own agenda, taking care of ourselves. We don't like it. He says, be still. Your only activity is no activity. Now, this isn't the idea of transcendental meditation, of sitting there and trying to empty your mind and just trying to be calm. It's not keep calm, it's be still. And it's be still and dwell on the things that God has done. The covenants he has made and kept, the promises in your life that he has provided, the salvation he has provided for you. The old Christian, contemporary Christian song, he didn't bring us this far to leave us. Right? I used to sing that one. Who sang that first? Dallas Holm, maybe? Or The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. The God of Jacob is our fortress. This week you're liable to be faced with tough situations. You're liable to be faced with temptation to sin. You're liable to be faced, well, we know we will. We're liable to be faced with the idea of judgment, the idea of those looking down upon us, those who are going to, we may not be dealing with Christian persecution like they do in other countries, but we're being persecuted in other ways. You're being taught that your beliefs are intolerant. You're being taught that we need to be tolerant of everybody unless they think the way we do. What are you going to do? Are you going to shrink? Are you going to cry out to God and to Moses and ask, why in the world did you bring me here? Or are you going to follow the advice of Moses and stand firm in what you believe? He didn't say stand firm and fight. He said stand firm and watch. Watch what God will do. So that's what we have for today. So if you're on Facebook, if you have any questions, send them to us either on the comments or private message to me. And if you have anything that I can do for you, let me know, and I'll find somebody who can handle it for you. I'm just kidding. So it's good to have you with us. Just let us know what we can do for you. You all have a great week.